All right. So again, thank y'all for being here. Let's see. Let me think this through. If I can get it to go. Nope. Okay. Come on. There we go. All right. So, you're here, I assume, because you are interested in stepping up to tell your story and get your perspective out there into the world, and to key decision makers in particular. But there's so many benefits coming from doing this work. One, it does get you in front of the people who ultimately are making decisions about our lives and our classrooms and our students. It makes sure that everything is in the public record, right? So even though the DC State Board of Education has limited direct authority, they are a government entity. They do have, open meetings and public records, and they're subject to all those requests. So getting our voices into the public record, to me, is just a way to make sure that no politician, no leader, nobody who's in power can say that they didn't know about whatever XYZ issue is going on. So even if they're not present in the room at that time, getting it on the record means that they cannot claim ignorance, which they always try to do. Then a lot of times, especially in DC, we see that decisions are getting made without including teacher voices at all, or really anyone's voice from the school level, people who are actually carrying out the policies. And so we need to force our way to the table. We need to force people to listen to us, because we're the only ones who really know the realities that the policies that people pass who are elected have in our classrooms and for our students. Did anyone else want to share a reason for why they want to do this? Put themselves out there and share? It's okay if you don't. All right. So the DC State Board of Education, currently, the way that you testify will be that you're going to get invited to a WebEx. So they'll send you a link. You may just want to make sure that you have the app already downloaded. It doesn't take long. So, even if, you just tried to sign in 10 minutes in advance, you probably would be able to just download it and be right on. It's just kind of a plug-in. It doesn't require a full restart of your computer or anything like that. But you may just want to, when you do get sent the link, test it out, make sure you have everything downloaded. That way, when it's 5:30 p.m. on the 15th or on the day you're testifying, you just be able to quickly sign in. People get called up to testify in groups, usually of 4 or 5, depending on how large the number of people testifying is. I've often gone when it was in person, where I am the only person there testifying, so I get my 3 minutes. But now that it's online, the last time there were over 20 people who testified. So they did it in groups of 4, and had 5 panels, is what they call it. So you'll get 3 minutes to read. They did a really great job of at the 30-second mark, they'll switch the screen so you can see a 30-second countdown. If you go over a little bit, if you show no signs of stopping, they may, either they can press mute, so that's kind of new, right? But they usually don't. They usually just ask you to wrap up, your final sentence if you're going over. But again, they are displaying that last 30 seconds of time. I find that usually a page typed double-spaced to maybe a page and a half, if you're like reading at a pretty solid clip, is what should be able to get in. If you have more to say, though, you can send them your entire thing. If you have, documents, if you've got tables, like whatever you want to give them, you can give them. It could also be a single paragraph. Like it can be whatever you want. You can give it to them via email, the same email you'd sign up on, before or after. They'll put it up at any time. So I usually wait till after because I don't like them to know what I'm about to say, and I like to surprise them. They don't like surprises, so they don't like my style of doing it where they have to listen to me if they want to know what I'm saying, versus being able to read along, which they do prefer. But basically, if you have more to say and you couldn't get it done in the 3 minutes, you can submit your entire written testimony. It will be put up on the website with all their official documents and their agenda, and it's included for the record. So you don't have to, be done in 3 minutes if you've got more to say. After the panel that they called up goes, so the 4 or 5 people they called up to testify, then there's a round of questions. Each member of the State Board of Education, I believe, is 2 minutes that they could use to either just talk. Sometimes they'll just thank you for coming. They might reiterate a point you made. Some of them are running for office, so they might use the chance to kind of just speak to the issue. Or they may ask you a specific question, or they might ask the whole panel a question. You're welcome to, just engage in a dialogue. Most of the, currently the majority, I would argue, is very friendly to WTU members, right? We've been working really hard to elect people to the State Board of Education who are our friends, and we currently have a majority. And the people who are not friendly to us usually just don't ask us questions. They kind of just stay quiet if they're, they don't want us to talk anymore. So you get to kind of engage in those questions, and then it's over. And they usually ask us to sign out once we're done testifying, and we can then continue watching. If you want to keep watching the proceedings, they'll be live streamed on a YouTube page. So that's kind of just the basic rundown of what you do to testify at the DC SBOE in terms of just the technical element. Are there any questions about that or concerns? Pretty straightforward. So you do have to sign up the Monday prior, so that would be this Monday. Usually they say close of business. Because the people running it are friendly to WTU members, they don't, if you submitted at 6:30 p.m., it's not like they'd be like, oh, well, close of business ended at 5, we're not taking it. They're not, that's more the council, since they're not friendly to us and they're really strict. So, but if you are interested on Monday, you should put in for it. And if you end up deciding you can't do it or don't want to do it, that's also fine. They're not going to be upset about it. They'll just call your name, you won't be present, and they'll move on. All right. So then the actual writing of the testimony. So just briefly, we just have to always remind ourselves the people sitting up there do not know what we know. We are the experts. We're the ones who are living out these policies. They can say whatever they want about all the things they've done. We live it every day. We know the truth. We know how policies affect our kids. We don't even have to know the policies to know how they affect our kids. We just know what's going on in the classroom, what we're being told to do, and how that then affects our lives and the lives of our students. So you don't have to worry about having all the answers. You don't have to worry about knowing all the statistics and data. That's not what we need to be concerned with. That's their job. Our job is our students and doing our job to the best of our ability. So if you have that kind of data, fantastic, but it's completely unnecessary to have a really effective testimony that moves people to doing the right thing. So when looking at this particular topic, you can speak on anything. This is considered a public testimony time. They don't have, any rules about it being pertinent to whatever their agenda is. Because I do go every month, sometimes I tailor what I'm saying to their agenda. Other times, sometimes I'll give them a heads up and be like, I'm gonna have 5 people come testify about this topic. So maybe you'll just want to talk about it too, because this is what I want to talk about and this is what we want to talk about. Sometimes the goal is just to get something on their radar for future meetings that they might want to, pick up and do something with. So you can speak on anything you want. When it comes to COVID-19, if that is your primary goal, something you want to speak on at this meeting, I think there's a couple things to think about, or themes you could tie into. But again, ultimately, your story is what's going to be the most powerful. And this is stuff we all know. COVID-19 is dangerous and complex. DCPS is not working with us to implement a safe reopening strategy. They're not telling us anything. And the only communication we really got was a threat to come back in person or use leave. The DC Council needs to add money to the DCPS budget for tech and PPE. And the council, because it's basically acting like our school board, needs to demand evidence of extensive COVID-19 planning. While the State Board of Education has no direct authority over DCPS to say demand documents or, require things, as elected leaders, they have connections that we don't. They can reach out to their council member, and they're often very close to them, and they can push their council member to demand things. They can write op-eds that could get published in the Post, right? They can amplify our message. So yeah, maybe they can't pass a policy there and then that would fix things for us because that's not in their domain. That doesn't absolve them of the responsibility of fighting for our schools. And so you can come there and you can ask them to do anything that you want. Ultimately, we want them as allies and amplifying our message, because that's probably the most impactful way they could kind of go about this. And hey, if they want to pass a resolution asking for things, like, great, right? But they can amplify our voices in their personal and professional capacities. And that's what we're asking them to do, while also getting ourselves on the record, getting ourselves out there to the public with our message. Because people do watch these meetings, they're on local cable access. Like, people will come up to me like, I saw you on TV. And I'm like, how is that possible? And then it turns out they were watching an old SBOE hearing that was getting replayed. I mean, good for them, I guess. They're very civically engaged. So are there other things that you think should be included in kind of the larger narrative around COVID? I mean, ultimately, again, you can say whatever you want. Sorry, go ahead, Connie.
I guess one of the concerns is childcare, and what are teachers supposed to do with their children, whether if they're living in or out of the district. Has anybody been willing to speak about that? Or
well, I think that gets into the complexities, right?
Yeah,
that any attempt at reopening has to deal with that as one of the complexities, and it should be raised, right? WTU and DCPS need to collaborate on a strategy for that. So, like in our MOA, we ask for, well, one, we say everyone should be volunteers in terms of returning in person or not. And so potentially, a parent could say, I'm not volunteering to go in person because it's just impossible for me and my childcare situation. But we also added language saying that we want compensation. So if additional compensation, if you have to pay to be, my word's not coming together. Basically, it costs you money to have to go back to work in person, that you should be reimbursed for that.
Oh, like hazard pay?
Well, there's hazard pay, but when we put that in there too, but we also put a specific reimbursement for childcare costs for parents who choose to go back in person but don't have what normally they would have access to for childcare, and therefore are incurring additional costs beyond the norm, I guess. I don't know that the SBOE is really interested in our MOA per se. But I think that the fact that particular complexity is a very important one and one that should be raised to their attention. And then the point being that DCPS has no plan for that. Not one they've shared anyways. So if they have one, they need to start sharing it because people got to make plans. They got to understand what's going on. And that the SBOE can help us try to bring DCPS either to the table to talk to us about these things and to collaborate on it, or to at least share what they're up to. Frankly, to provide feedback. So yeah, I think that would fit in the, anything, any complication you bring up gets into the COVID-19 is complex. Any attempts to go back to in-person, we have to deal with those complexities first. We can't be dealing with them while we're trying to teach. We need to know them in advance.
I have a question just about shortages that have already existed, like the sub shortage. And special education teachers, in my experience, are usually the first ones to either be pulled from a self-contained classroom, or if they're an inclusion teacher, everything is disrupted and they go and babysit another classroom. That's extremely concerning for a multitude of reasons, obviously pre-COVID, but now it's putting an even bigger health risk on the students with the most severe and vulnerable needs.
Yeah, I think that's another great complexity to bring up, and ties into, right, that there are long-standing issues that DCPS has not properly dealt with, and now they're just getting even more heightened. And that the Aussie and frankly CDC regulations before Trump got to them requires grouping, right? Designated grouping. Anyone who's pushed into covering or serving as a substitute is no longer in their group. And therefore that would kind of disrupt the entire policy around being with a very small dedicated group of students only in order to reduce exposure and spread. And because we don't necessarily have systemic solutions for that, we probably therefore should not be going into in-person until we have systems set up that could properly deal with that. It would not put teachers at additional risk or having them be pushed to do something that's not acceptable, which would be to go into another room, get exposed to a whole other group of students, and possibly be spreading COVID to even more people if we're asymptomatic carriers and didn't know. So it's a good one. They're all good. Everything's good. Any issue you could think of is probably one that, needs to be brought to the forefront, because there's so many issues of returning in person that just aren't being dealt with. And I'm sure there's tons that I haven't thought of either. All right. So beyond, oops, things got messed up. They did, my bad. Sorry, let me delete that. Okay, so the opportunity to testify is coming up this Wednesday, the 15th, to 5:30 p.m. Usually testifying starts about 15 minutes in. If they have any ceremonial resolutions, they sometimes do those first. They also usually have a few introductory comments from the superintendent at Aussie, Hansel King. The president of the State Board of Education, Ruth Rottenberg, might have some words that she opens up with. So usually it takes 10 to 15 minutes to get started. If for some reason you're running late, you can still just sign in. And they've always been really nice about kind of going back up to the list. Like if you were first and you got missed, they would come back to you if you sign in and then just add you to a later panel. So, and it's usually, depending how many people testify, it can be over, by 7. If you're up front, then, it'll be over really quickly. And, by 5:45, you could leave and you don't have to watch the rest of it if you don't want to. If you're one of the later people on the list, and they usually just put the list in order when you sign up. So, if you sign up now, you'll probably be higher up on the list than if you wait till Monday. But yeah, so it usually doesn't take too long to get it done. You can also look at the list in advance. It'll be published on the State Board of Education website. So if you wanted to see, well, I only want to sign in closer to when I'd probably go, and you see you're at the bottom, then you could probably wait an extra 30 minutes if you want before signing in, but they'll send out instructions for what they would prefer. And you do, again, need to sign up just by the end of the day Monday if you are interested. And you can always email them back and say like, well, I don't want to anymore. And again, you can also just submit written testimony if you don't want to testify at all. You can even tell them I want it to be anonymous, and then obviously don't put your name on any of your documents, but they'll post it anonymously. And if you want to be extra anonymous, you can send it to me. And I've then sent things on just being like, this is from another teacher. They want it posted anonymously. And that way you're extra not tied to it. Personally, unless you're calling out your school, like sometimes you have to call your own principal out and it's not about DCPS, then you may want to be anonymous because principals have a lot of power. But if you're talking about DCPS as a whole, in my experience, it's not, principals usually have similar problems that we do. They just can't say anything. So rarely, on one, they're also not really paying attention. So unless you really are kind of exposing something that's going on in your school and doing some type of whistleblowing, then I personally have not heard of people getting retaliated against for speaking on the record about DCPS. Do they like it? No, but they have so much going on. I think they usually don't really pay much attention to what we're up to with the WTU. And if you do have further concerns, you can feel free to reach out to me. There are like other strategies for how to placate a principal if you do feel like your principal is a little bit more of a retaliatory sort. And then of course you do have First Amendment protection. So anything that does happen is illegal. So if they are trying it, then you should absolutely let me know and we get the union on it real fast. But in general, especially with State Board of Education, I have not heard of somebody being retaliated against for what they said at the SBOE. Yeah. There are a few other opportunities to get involved on COVID that are just kind of coming up pretty immediately. One is on Monday. Phil Mendelson is going to have, he's calling it a meetup with Mendo. He has it on his Twitter, and it's going to be on Facebook, and I guess he's going to be answering questions people submit in advance. We're still kind of planning exactly what kind of activity we want, but we'll probably hijack his hashtag because he said that he's not heard from any real people that DCPS needs more technology and more money for technology for distance learning. Like, that's weird because I've definitely talked to you and so have a whole lot of other teachers, and apparently now we're not real. So that's good to know. And a lot of parents, and apparently they're not real either. So we're going to definitely bomb his attempts at meeting with the public and tear up the comments section and his mentions in Twitter. So if you like using social media, just kind of keep your eye out on Monday. Then next weekend, there's going to be, well, on the 19th, there's a plan in progress for a union town hall on COVID-19. Just keep your eye out, really. The messaging is probably going to go out on Monday for that with the morning brew. And similarly, there's going to be a WTU car caravan the next day, that Monday. Details are still being worked out, to be fair, on DC budget demands, which are for money for PPE and then money for technology for DCPS. Because any attempts, well, any learning that we do next year is going to be more expensive than it was this year, and DCPS is pretending that it's not, and they're not changing any of the budget requests, and it just doesn't make any sense. So a few other tips. I think I forgot to include an outline slide because I usually have a handout. So one, in terms of outline, I usually start with a brief introduction of who I am. That could be whatever you want it to be. Your teacher, your years in the classroom, where you teach, if you want to include that, what you teach. All that's what makes you an expert, right? You know, 13 years in the classroom. If you are a resident of DC, sometimes it's good to drop that just because, you know, some of them might pay more attention if like, oh, you're Ward 3 and I'm in Ward 3. So I'm going to, you know, maybe listen to you more carefully because you're one of my constituents. You can also just say, like, you know, I teach at such and such school and they do care about the schools in their wards a little more than they care about all of them for whatever reason. Then really you kind of just should focus exactly on what you want to talk about, whatever the issue is. The complication of childcare and returning to in-person learning, the complication of substitutes and how we don't have enough substitutes, especially in critical need areas, and therefore, you know, you're getting pulled in the classes, and how will that look with COVID when we can't be getting pulled into different classes. So you share your experiences. You know, I suggest always trying to frame things as positively as you can as well, in the sense that, like, I love teaching, I love being in my classroom, I love being with my students, but XYZ, right? Like, they sometimes forget that. Like, we're here because of how much we care. We do our job because of how much we care. And we'd go somewhere else and do something else if we didn't. But sometimes DC, you know, politicians can forget that. They think we're here just for ourselves, or they have some other anti-teacher narrative kind of running in the back of their minds. So we always want to remind them of the truth, which is that we adore our jobs, we love our kids, and we want to do what's best for them and for us. And that's why we're here. Then also really, you know, always sticking with the real root causes of what's going on, right? For COVID, it's really DCPS's lack of collaboration, right? Their lack of willingness to work with their teachers to develop solutions. Like, we are here asking for them to work with us. We're not saying we don't want to go back, full stop. We're saying the only way that'd be possible is if we think through this huge list of concerns that are legitimate, that need to be addressed before we can go back into a classroom and even feel like we're kind of safe. And that maybe we do have to admit at some point that it won't be safe, and therefore we cannot go back as it stands until health conditions significantly change. If you do use a story from your classroom, just, you know, keep it general, keep names out of it, etc. And again, always just tie it back to the larger problem. If it's happening in your school, it's happening in all the schools, right? So of course, use yourself as an example, use your experience as an example, but always make sure it's very clear to the people listening that, yeah, this happened in my school, it happens in all of them. This is not just a problem for me and my students, this is the problem for all of us. I'm just the one here to deliver that message, right? So just always kind of trying to tie it to that bigger picture again tends to just be helpful. And again, when you do that, it also reduces any risk of retaliation, because you're not talking about your school. You're talking about the entire system, and that's not your principal's fault. That's DCPS's fault. That's the politicians' fault. They're the ones who should be working with us, who should be trying to actively problem solve. The principal's in the same boat we are. They're not asking them either. Like, they're sitting there being like, what do I do? How do I open up in, you know, August? They don't know. They want to know. All right. So ideally, politicians love this. They love to hear answers. Now, they want easy ones, and there aren't any. But if you can think of a way of how you want us to move forward, then presenting it is always a good idea. If you have a very specific solution, politicians eat that up. They adore it. They will thank you for it. They'll say, oh, you're so solutions oriented. That's so great. But at the same time, I frankly personally refuse, which is why they never thank me for my testimonies, unless they're my friend already. Instead, I tend to focus on process because I personally don't believe there's often any answers to what we're talking about. Beyond needing to work together, that we need to collaborate, that we need to problem solve, that different schools may have different solutions to different problems. But if a problem you bring up does have a very clear solution that you believe would work, feel free to share it. They love to hear it. But to me, my big one is I just come back to DCPS needs to collaborate with the WTU to develop a solution to X. That they can't come up with these solutions by themselves because they don't even know what questions to ask because they're not in the classrooms the way we are. And like, we're only coming and asking questions because we want to come up with solutions. And we're pointing out flaws in their logic or things they haven't thought of because we want to make sure that they are thought of and solved before anyone's life is put at risk or anyone's job or their family security is put at risk. But you could also just say what you want to see. You could just say, we need a solution to this. I mean, you, again, do not have to have an answer. If you do, they love it. If you don't, it's not a problem. It's their job to figure out the solutions. This is what they got elected to do. They need to do their jobs. Let's see. Okay. Once you've given your testimony, I personally think you should try to get it out anywhere you can. You've already taken the time to write your thoughts down. You could try submitting it as a letter to the editor. The DC line will publish, frankly, just about anything. We have lots of groups that are happy to put testimonies up on their local blogs, on list hosts and things like that. So, I mean, and you can decide, you know, if you want to have your name removed again, et cetera. Like if you're trying to then take it bigger than just Wednesday, there's opportunities to share it and to have your information stripped from it if that would make you feel more comfortable. I tend to tweet my testimony. So what I do is I basically cut and paste lines of my testimony and I make it into a thread on Twitter because that's frankly just where my personal audience is. You could post it up to the closed Facebook group. You could just email it to all the council members who aren't going to technically be at the State Board of Education hearing. But you're like, well, I already wrote it, so may as well send it as an email to everyone. You could send it to the mayor. Like you could really, you've already written it, so you can just start sending it places. Or, you know, if you're like, well, I really like talking about this, I think I'm going to try to set up a meeting with my local council member. Like, you know, once you already have it, making it your cause and trying to spread it, I mean, it works. The more people hear it, the more likely they are to listen to it. And myself and Joe Whedon, I think I put on the next slide, can help with that. Yeah. So, you know, if you're like, okay, I really like that experience, I had a good reception, and I feel like I really want to keep getting this particular issue out there, you know, become the champion of your cause. Because frankly, if you don't, who will? Right? Like, I'm not a parent. And I have a lot of things I'm championing, I believe, on behalf of other members, but I can't champion everything. You know, I'm not a special educator. I don't deal with the same issues that someone in special education does. And while I can speak to them broadly, it's not as powerful coming from me because I'm speaking on behalf of others and not from my own lived experience. And it's just more powerful when it comes from the impacted parties. So yeah, so Joe Whedon at WTU, he could potentially put it up on the website. Like there's lots of places we can get your message to go, but he could also just help you figure out how to get it out there, as can I. I suppose I should put my email on there. So you're welcome to email me as well. Yeah, so that's pretty much what I have. I don't know if there's any particular questions or additional concerns that I can try to help field, or even brainstorming what to talk about if you're not already entirely sure what you want to say. I can